think there are many, many people out in the world who find themselves in a position, whether they're in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, they're looking at retirement, whatever it is, where they might have the opportunity to find their next, and they don't know where to begin.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. Cindy Carrillo, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. I am so looking forward to our conversation today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Good. Well, I know you've got a great view out your back window there. We're recording this on a Friday afternoon, so we'll get through this and you'll be able to enjoy that view. But we're going to learn a little bit more about that view as well as we go through the journey of your story today. But I'll start you off the same way I start all my first-time guests, with a question that is asking you to share a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a person or as a leader.
Oh man, I had a great childhood, just a great childhood. Here's a story. So it's a little later in my childhood. I was about 16 years old, and I had an older brother. So he was a senior in high school. I was a sophomore, sitting around the kitchen table with my parents. And I was never an exceptional student. I was always a kind of an average student. Um, didn't if I applied myself, I would get straight A's, but gotta say, didn't apply myself all that much. I had a lot of different interests. And I remember getting my report card and sitting around the table, and really supportive parents, by the way. And when my brother gets his, I get mine. And mine's like an A here, mostly B's. And science, not great, like a C plus. And my brother, in all earnest, like looks across the table at me and he says, "So Cindy, how does it feel to be average?"
Hmm.
And it wasn't like a diss. It wasn't like he wasn't putting me down. He was really curious. And I gotta say, my parents kind of leaned in, like, "Yeah, how does it feel?" And it seems so weird to say it now, but I was like, "It's fine. I'm fine. I'm
Hmm.
fine living the life that I'm living right now as a 16-year-old." But I will tell you, I kind of grew up under the radar. And I was the youngest of all the grandchildren. I was the youngest in my family, and nobody expected a lot from me. They didn't not expect me to do well, but there were no real preconceived notions about who I was going to become and what I was going to do. And as I look back on that, as I went through my career in my life, and here I am at 67 years old, I appreciate that because I wasn't locked into anything as a kid. And I remember my mother always saying to me, "Oh, honey, you just do whatever you choose to do. And when you figure it out, you'll do it well." And I think that sort of was the freeing moment in my childhood and my early adult years too, to just like relax. You're fine.
I
You're
like
fine.
that because, again, we talk about so many, especially with authors, and the start of their story is this great tragedy that they've overcome or whatever it is. And I get a sense, even as I read your profile, read your bio, and through your LinkedIn work, that there's a lot of success in your world, and there may be some things that you've had to overcome along the way,
Oh
but it
yeah.
sounds like some of that overcome is just the expectation that there wasn't an expectation. You had to set that for yourself. So I appreciate that, and I can tell right away how that has impacted your story here that we're going to talk about today. And that's your book, Finding Your Next. Now, let's start off with a very important question because I need to speak with your publisher, although I think you might have self-published the book, because I think you spelled the word incorrectly. And I know that you're missing an E inside of that word. So there's got to be a story behind the title to get started. So tell me that story. Let's hear it.
I when I talk about finding your next, I always have to emphasize the next. And people ask the question all the time. And as I've become a coach in this part of my career, and even when I was running business, the question was always actually, what's next? What's next? And when we say it, we emphasize that and we kind of rush through it. So when I was going to write the book about finding your next, I wanted to really emphasize the importance of the next. And we just didn't put an E in there because it really wasn't important. Because when you say it, it's just NXT, just NXT.
I got to tell you, I was trying to find it. I was trying to find the answer before I came to you, and I didn't find it. I thought I was going to get an answer like, "Oh, it's the secret recipe, and I can't tell you what it is, or I'd have to kill you." It's like the thing that's gone back in the family for a long time. But I appreciate what you're saying with regards to the emphasis of on the word next. I don't know, may or may not. Again, I like to read a lot of books, and one of the most impactful books that I've read in the last several years was by Jeff Henderson called What to Do Next as well. So he spelled it with E. So you may have to talk to him that he spelled it
He's just
incorrectly
wrong.
instead of
He's
you.
wrong. Right.
Exactly. Exactly. But look, so that is the story. And I make up after just some of the brief conversation that we had that it really is about your next in terms
It
of your
is.
story. So why did you write this book, when you wrote it, and who did you write it for?
I think the reason that I wrote the book was that it was a pretty big transformation I went through. I ran a company for over 20 years, founded it, was the CEO of it, grew it, did an amazing job of building a team and a product and built something new and exciting, and reached a point in my development where I realized, oh my goodness, I think I'm done with this and I'm looking for what's next. And that process unto itself of coming to the decision to move on and to sell the company, I was in a great place. I wasn't in crisis. It wasn't a horrible situation that I needed to move from. And I realized that many of us find ourselves in a position in life where we're just ready. It's an opportunistic next. It's, I'm good. And now what? And how do I apply everything that I've learned? So when I sold the company, I was in a unique and fortunate position of having some resources, having all the time in the world, and being able to really go out into the world and say, where, what, how would I thrive next? And ended up buying a ranch in Southwest Colorado. I tell you, I've never lived on a ranch before. I've always been a nice suburban girl. I don't know anything about living in rural America, and really went through a 10-year transformation from being a CEO, lots of great suits and high heels, and fashion was a thing, and traveling and amazing experiences, to now living on a ranch. I now have a great cowboy boot collection and just a different wardrobe, but really it was much more of a deeper transformation of what was productivity going to look like? What was important to me in my life? How do you go through a process like this from being a CEO to now being a ranch girl? And that's essentially who I've become, and a coach, and developing different kinds of programs, and totally different than who I was before and what I did, and yet totally who I was before
Mm,
and what I did before, just in a different way. And having gone through that process, I thought, I'm not that unique. I'm actually not that, or I'm not that special. I'm quite ordinary. And I think there are many, many people out in the world who find themselves in a position, whether they're in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, they're looking at retirement, whatever it is, where they might have the opportunity to find their next, and they don't know where to begin.
mm.
So I wrote the book, and I wrote the book using my story as the illustrations of the process of going through to find your next.
Yeah, because I would imagine even as you talk about that, and I actually have there's a person that I've been coaching that has absolutely come to my mind that is going to get a copy of this book in their mailbox
Thank
next
you.
week as you tell that story. First, I love the analogy of high heels to cowboy boots. I think that is really cool as you talk about, or whether it's team members to goats, and you'll get a chance to talk about your goats that you have on your ranch as well. I think that's a really cool just story that draws. But my guess is you were in a situation, as you mentioned, from a resource standpoint, that you frankly didn't have to do anything. You could have retired. What does
I
that
could
word sound like to you? Even back then or today, what does the word retired sounds like to you?
I said I was going to retire, but every time I said it, I put air quotes around it, and I would retire. So I knew that retirement in a more traditional sense, which I think most of us think about, is we're not earning anymore. We might volunteer, we're spending our time, maybe we're playing sports, pickleball's a thing, I don't know. Um, I knew that I wasn't done working. I didn't know how I wanted to work. So I used retirement as the bridge, as a way for others to understand that I was taking a break to figure out how I wanted to work next and how I needed to design a different way of living my life with a different way of working. But I still like to earn. And I think that retirement is a place and a time most of us think about. We don't have to work
Hmm.
and earn a living anymore. We're living in a different way. And that just wasn't the case for me.
Perfect. I mean, I'm close to where you are, and I get tired of asking that question, even of when I'm going to retire, because
Yeah.
I just don't sense that word as much as looking forward to that date, if you will, that you stop, because it has too much of you stop, you don't add value anymore. There's some other
Yeah.
word that, whether it's reinvents or whatever it is, that you can continue to add value. And one of the ways you've done that is with your book. So your book has 16 chapters. I don't want to not talk about that. I could talk stories all day long, but the book has 16 chapters. We clearly don't have time to go through all 16 of those chapters, but it's important about where you start. So where did your story start and how you wrote this book? What's the first step?
The first step was to identify the dream. And I think that as we age, we stop dreaming and we
Mm,
think that we've got to get so rational and so logical and so real. And I'm not talking about dreams that are fantastical. I'm talking about dreams that can be based in reality, but they're aspirations for ourselves of what we think we can do based on who we are, where we can thrive, where our skills and our strengths are. And I remembered back, when I moved to Colorado, I think I was 19 years old, and I took a road trip with my best friend Nancy, and we came down to Southwest Colorado, and we found this little town of Ouray, which is called the Switzerland of America. And I looked up at these mountains and I was awestruck. And I thought, I think I shouted it out in the car. One day I will live here in these mountains. And then I went back and life happened. And I started to work. I got married. I had kids. I started a business. And I think I forgot the dream.
mm,
And when I found myself in this point in my life, I started to reimagine life again. And what kept coming back were snippets of this dream, this magnificent view, this living in the mountains, this lifestyle change. And as I kept saying it, and as I would put air quotes around, I'm going to retire in the mountains with a beautiful view, and I'm going to sit on a big porch in a rocking chair with a really big hat and just sort of look at that view, I remembered the dream. And so that became the direction that I went in. I'm going to go back to that area. I'm
mm.
going to see what's in that area. I'm going to see if it still has meaning to me. And I did. I came back down here And I saw those views again. And it's the one thing about mountains, it takes them a long time to change. And the amount of time between me being 19 and having sold the company, they didn't change all that
Hmm.
much. They were still absolutely magnificent in the way that I remembered them. So I realized this is where I wanted to be.
I love that as the first step is to, and I certainly appreciate as you talk about as we age, we stop dreaming. I don't know why that is. I think it's something that is there. It leads me into one of your questions, but you end up purchasing this ranch and
Did
it's the
I
30
constantly,
35 acres. And now
it's
once you want animals and
Yeah, it's 35 acres with nothing on it. I mean, there's pasture. So I'm like, oh my goodness, what does this mean? But I stood on this land. And it was a very sort of fortuitous coming together of timing and everything. It was 2008, 2009 when I was on the land, right after the economy had tanked, real estate market had tanked. And so I'm looking at this 35-acre parcel with 3 mountain ranges surrounding it. Normally, I wouldn't have been able to touch it, but it was good timing.
Mhm.
And so I bought it. I was given the opportunity and I bought it. And my first inclination was, oh my goodness, where do I go from here? I know nothing about building on raw land, essentially. There was no services. But, when I stood here and I looked out there, I could see a future. I couldn't see where the barn would ultimately be. I couldn't see where the garden plot was going to be, but I could see my family coming. I could see my friends coming and us wanting to share it. I could actually hear laughter and joy. And I thought, oh, now all I have to do is build it. And to quote the old famous movie, and if I build it, they will come. But I need to build it with a certain intentionality of what I'm trying to create. And that was the second step. That
Okay.
was trying to figure out what's really important. Why? Why are you doing this? And I think we all have to ask ourselves, when we all go through the process of figuring out what's next, what's our first human knee jerk reaction? It's to get into the weeds. I want to change my job. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, I've had this job with this title. So logically, we begin with what our title is going to be, what we need to earn, where we need to live, what we want 2 or 3 weeks vacation. We get into the nitty gritty stuff. And I'm interested in, wait, let's back it up. You're making a major change in your life. Why? What do you want this to do for you?
Mm.
What's the life you really want? Why don't we begin with what's really important in the life you want to live? Then you can design around that. But if we don't stop and back up and ask ourselves why, we miss the point of designing the life we really want. And I had this unique opportunity with 35 acres in front of me. I mean, everybody gets to ask the why, but not everybody has 35, virgin
Right.
acres in front of them. So asking why and what I wanted to do with it. So we wanted to share it. We wanted friends and family to come down. I also live 6 hours away from my core group of people. So nobody's stopping by for dinner. Somebody's coming by for a few days. So we needed to build the accommodations that people could be comfortable here. We wanted a sustainable life. So looking at materials, energy, food, everything about living a sustainable life. What did that look like? What could that look like? That became the criteria for all the future decisions about how to build this lifestyle that we wanted to live.
So fun. Field of Dreams, you had the Ranch of Dreams, or the 35 Acres of Dreams.
Yeah.
That movie. There's another one. They make movies about this kind of stuff, right? I think it was Under the Tuscan Sun. It's not a movie that I watched. It's
Yeah,
not a movie that I
right.
watched, right? I mean, I think it's one of those movies, right?
I'm sure. I'm
But
sure.
but but
Yeah.
you didn't call it the Field of Dreams or the Ranch of Dreams. You came up with a name for it as well. So let's drive down that path just a little bit and talk about the name of your dream location.
Yes. So, we realized that I keep on saying it's my partner, Matthew. And so coming down this area all this time and driving by all the ranches, because when you're doing this, you need to go and like look at what everybody else has done before you can make up what you want to do,
Mhm.
and get inspiration. So we're doing that. And oh my goodness, everybody names their land. Growing up in suburbia, you do not like name your house, right? But down
Mhm.
here and in every rural area, people name their properties.
It's on
And
the
if you
gate, right? It's over
Oh,
top
you
of your
got the
gate when you drive
gate,
on. Yeah.
and we decided to do it down low, but
Okay.
yeah, you know, and so we're coming up with horrible names, Peaceful Acres and Vista View, and just looking back on it, you just get really kitschy and you get
Mhm.
silly. And we were starting to build, and so we had an RV at the time and would park the RV on the property for a few days and meet with the builders. We're sitting at the kitchen table on the RV, and we're coming up with really stupid, silly names. And then Matthew's phone starts, it just sort of lights up, when you kind of hit it.
Mhm.
And on his screen, it says CC Blue. And I'm like, who's CC Blue? And my name is Cindy Carrillo.
Mhm.
So CC. And this is going to sound really, but I have blue eyes. And his nickname for me was CC Blue. And I didn't know it. He just put me in his phone. He would call me Blue every now and then, but I didn't know that's how he had me in his phone. And I got all, who is that? And he looks up at me and he goes, "Well, that's you, silly." And I was like, "No." And I'm getting all verklempt now. It's just sort of, it just touched my heart. And he's the one who looked up and said, "That's it. That's
Mm.
the name." And I said, "Well, that seems kind of selfish to put, my nickname up
Mhm.
there." But it has taken on a life of its own. So the ranch is CC Blue.
Well,
And even my kids talk about coming to CC Blue. And I love branding from being in business for so long.
sure.
So we brand everything. And it's all CC Blue. So it's a beautiful, beautiful way to have it take on a life of its own. That's even beyond me.
Well, I have seen the branding. I've seen the coffee mugs with NXT on the bottom. Next on the bottom of that coffee mug. I've seen a
Next.
picture. So yeah, you're into the branding part of it as you see that. Okay. So we took that off ramp for a little while, went to that rest area about the name. That is so cool how it got named on a pocket dial or a butt dial that you called yourself and now you name it CC Blue. Perfect. Back on the on ramp here. Look, you've gone through those first two steps and we can't go through all of them, but I want to touch on at least two more. One is you talked about the breakthrough blockers. So
Yeah.
there had to be a time where you're like, nope, not going to work. Tell me what those breakthrough blockers are that not just you, but keep folks from realizing their dream.
I think we all do it. I think there are things that we come up with ideas, we get excited about what could be next, and something stops us. And as I was going through the process, I realized that it's actually just a few things that stop us. But the first two have to do with fear. The first fear is the fear of the unknown. And oh my goodness, of course it stops you in your tracks because you don't have any idea what's in front of you. So I looked out at the land, I got really excited, bought the property, and I got to tell you, the couple of weeks following that, I was paralyzed paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. What do I do? Where do I go? What could it be? It's almost like standing on the cliff, and you look down and you can't even see the bottom. It's just darkness. Well, of course we're going to stop because nobody's going to be foolish enough to jump into that without shedding light on what's below us, what's out in front of us.
Mm.
So I think when we experience the fear of the unknown, it stops us with a bunch of, oh my goodness, what if questions. What if? What if I fail? What if this
Mm.
goes wrong? What if? And I think if we just understand that 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 is the flashing light that is telling us we need more. We need more information. And it's not a flashing light to stop us. It's a light that's telling us move forward, gather more information, and figure out what the questions are and what the answers are, then the fear starts to dissipate because it's no longer unknown. We have steps in front of us. The other fear that then sort of creeps up is when we've got the voices on either side, and that's the fear of failure. You know, that's another what if it all goes to hell in a handbasket? What if it just doesn't work? And here's my take on failure. I don't think failure exists if you learn. We all need to make mistakes in order to learn. We're not just going into our next with the full blueprint of how to do it step by step, and it's going to be perfect. We need to try, and we need to sometimes make mistakes. Then we need to learn. If you learn, there is no failure. So if we ask ourselves, what's the worst that can happen? Oftentimes we get to a place where we realize it's not that bad if I mess up here or there. So for me, you know, if I ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? It's not failure. It's not making a mistake because I'll learn and I'll do better the next time. It's death. That's sort of like if I could die
Hmm.
or
Yes.
maim somebody, hurt somebody else, then it probably isn't worth the risk. But short of that, I could pretty well figure it out. So once I get to the place where failure is not an issue, I've answered a bunch of questions, then those blockers that are trying to get me to stay where I am in the status quo, it's too risky. I can kick them out of the way and I can feel the excitement and
Hmm.
I can move forward onto the next step. The third blocker that is almost the most insidious out there is our willingness to settle for what's not great.
Hmm.
And the first two fears are trying to keep us there. But I always ask my clients, you know, why are you staying? You're not happy. Your boss is driving you nuts. You hate your job. You wake up in the morning depleted of energy versus moving into something else. And the answer I often get is, at least I know what I've got. What if I don't find something better? I'm not sure I have the time or the energy to find something better or more. And oftentimes we feel like the amount of time and energy it would take and the risk involved isn't worth it. And my take on that is you are
Hmm.
worth it. You're worth it. There can be more. And the time and energy you spend staying in a miserable state or staying in a place where it's just not good enough, but maybe it's just okay, is actually as much time and energy as you would spend on finding something different or more. So we have
Love
to keep
that.
that one away.
You have to overcome those things. You're exactly right. Those barriers can be ones that they have kept so many people
So
from
many.
achieving greatness. They
Yeah.
don't even realize that those limiting beliefs that exist inside of us. Okay, look, so you talk about those barriers. You've now got a book and a corresponding workbook that goes along with it to help people to work through that process. You also do one-on-one coaching. I want you to talk a little bit about though your unique immersion program. Tell
Thank
me
you.
about that, what you do at CC Blue, and maybe share a fun story, a success story that you've had with a client at CC Blue with your immersion program.
You know, I started the immersion after we had been at the ranch for a number of years, and we've got a beautiful guest house, and we've got a barn full of animals, and we've got a beautiful garden with a greenhouse that grows vegetables all year round. We've developed a lifestyle. We want to share the lifestyle. And concurrently, earlier in building through the ranch, I started a coaching business based on all my years in business. And came out a number of years ago looking at a way to combine the two. How do I take the coaching business and this amazing place that we've created and the lifestyle that we live, how do we share that and blend those together? And what we came up with is the idea of an immersion here for about 3 days. But the unique part about it is that I don't actually like to work with larger groups of people. I thrive. My sweet spot is working with individuals, couples, or business partners. Where we're talking about what the alignment needs to be, whether or not it's your own alignment as a couple or as business partners to move forward. And so I developed a process behind finding your next, where people come to the ranch, they stay in our guest house, we feed them, we pamper them, make them feel really good because, why come otherwise?
Do we get
But
to
it's
pet goats too?
oh,
That's
you
the
get to
most
pet goats and pig bellies and miniature horses. It's an amazing experience. But more importantly, it gets people out of their current reality and into an environment that is very open and very safe. And this is an opportunistic kind of coaching. Now, I've had a few people come when they've been in crisis, no two ways around it. Most people come when they are looking to find what's next in their life and they just don't have the clarity. They don't know why. And they don't know what the why is behind what they're looking for. They're getting mired in the details. So when they come here, we back it up. And we go through a process of figuring out the why. And then we get into the details and develop the path. And it's it's a pleasant experience. It's a joyous experience. It's lovely to watch people come with maybe a vague understanding or a preconceived notion of what they thought they should do and end up leaving with a new sense of clarity and openness to what they could be doing, not what they should be doing.
Hmm. Love that. Well, I think that's probably going to be quite an experience for many. And I know that just has to be fun. Again, how your dream has started out, 35 acres of open land and what it's turned into sounds really phenomenal. I'm curious throughout your career, maybe again, another off ramp here for just a minute, in choosing to write the book. Were you a reader in terms of your personal development career as a leader? And if so, who was someone that you really enjoyed reading, or who was an influencer for you from your personal development?
My own personal development, I'm a little irreverent in certain ways. So there's an author, Jen Sincero, who I read, who has a book on You're a Badass. And her style gave me a certain permission to write a book with that was just honest and could have humor in it and be forthright and direct. I always wanted to write a book, but I never had a topic that I thought was worthy of a book. And let me tell you, the process of writing a book is one big finding your next unto itself. And that is a concept within the book and something that I think I've lived in my life and coach about, which is we have the opportunity to have many, many nexts, little nexts, mid-sized nexts, and big nexts. And if we approach them all the way I approached the book as it was a next for me. So there was a process to go through. There was a learning to get from it. And it's not, when you write a book, it isn't just about what you're going to put out. It's about what you're going to get from it
Mm.
as well. And it was a tremendous learning experience for me. And I had the fear of failure, oh my goodness, and the fear of the unknown and the willingness to settle all sitting around my head at very different points. So we still had to really break through those blockers. Every time you enter into a next, you have to do that. So sometimes we call it a next step in our lives, a next phase, whatever. I happen to call it a next. So the book for me was so fulfilling because it was about telling the story of the process, the lessons learned so somebody else could learn from that process and internalize it themselves, but also go through it yet again in the actual writing of the book. So that when I started the book, I thought, oh gosh, I just hope I can do it and get through it and then get it out there. And then what? And then what? Then wrote the workbook. The audio, I just finished recording the audio book, which is coming out later this month. So, which was yet another next because I
Hmm.
had a phobia of reading out loud, believe it or not, especially in public. And here I sat in a studio for like 20 hours reading to an audience that was not in front of me, but I knew they'd be out there. So another next.
Hmm.
So now I'm thinking, I wonder if there's another book. And do you know what the title? No, I don't know what the title is. Do you know what the topic is?
What's the topic?
It's what we were talking about earlier. Retirement.
Mm.
What the heck is this thing called retirement? I struggle with it. You struggle with the idea of it. I think there's a boatload of us out there who are really trying to reinvent what retirement looks like. So that just might be my next.
I had lunch with someone today. How much longer are you going to work, John? As long as God will let me work, I'm telling you, because I love what I
Right?
do. And that's what you really find what's going on. So the book test for you, book test that I've heard before for me is on the reader side as well. So they read your book, they put it up on the shelf, like those, if you're watching on YouTube, can see behind me. And they're going to look at that shelf for a while, but a year later, they're going to see the binding of your book that's sitting there. What do you want them to feel when they see that binding, when they look at it a year later?
I want them to pick it up again because they're going through their next
Hmm.
and say, I just, what was that thing? What was that story? What was that? I want the book to be used. I want the book to be revisited. And I wrote the workbook because a number of people told me they would have liked to have a guide that as they were reading the book, but really almost after they read the book, and for future years to be able to help them work through the process yet again, because we're not done. We're never done.
Hmm.
I hope we're not done. So, if our goal is to have many nexts in our lives, then I hope that people will use the book and that there will be lots and lots of pages turned down, or lots of highlights on the ebook, or whatever, and use the workbook every single time they're going through a next to remind them that there's a process, to remind them that there are questions they need to ask themselves.
So cool. Cindy, how do folks get in touch with you? And also, where do you want them to go to get your book?
I want them to go anywhere they want to get the book, but it's mostly on Amazon. It's
Mhm.
also in a number of different places where you can buy books. Um, finding your next, we talked about branding. It's my website. So finding your next with an NXT. And my contact information is there, talks about my coaching service where I do one-on-one through Zoom. And it also talks about the immersion to find your next at CC Blue Ranch. So it's
Ex-
just finding your next.
Excellent. I'll put a link to the show notes so that everybody can get there. I encourage everybody to go and get the book as well. Last question. You get the last word. I'm going to give you a billboard. I don't know how many people can see it from your ranch there, but you can put the billboard anywhere you want to, and you can put any message you want to on that billboard. What's the message that you put on there, and why do you put that message?
Oh, billboard. Ah, it's funny. I think I'd go back to the first thing that I said here on the podcast, which is don't forget to dream.
Hmm. Makes a great hashtag. Fits well. Cindy
Well,
Carrillo, I've had a blast chatting with you on this
thank you, John.
interview
This has been
today.
wonderful.
And I wish you the best going forward in the second book, as well as success with this and your coaching program as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was a gas.